Polipede works here, and we're back from break with chapter 1068, A Genius's Dream. We get this cover story continuing, the whole German thing, now with Caesar and Judge in a deadlock of beating each other, which is very surprising seeing as how Caesar is a Logia, so I'm guessing he's turning off his abilities because he's flustered in meeting Judge, or they were colleagues, so this scene is being played for gags. What's very interesting is that we see a little thought bubble that represents the past when they both worked for Vegapunk and Mads. So we see to the, I believe, the right, we see the silhouette of Caesar, right? Because it's big and billowy, so that's his hair. He's always had long hair. And then to the left, we see Judge. And I'm remembering now, we've never seen Judge without his helmet. And I think it's to imply that you don't know who is who. However, we've seen Caesar Clown in the past, and he's always kind of had this long, flowing mane of hair. So I'm thinking the one with the long hair is Caesar, and this other one with a weird sort of bowl cut and a big chin, which is very evident because Judge's big chin is in fact Judge. Another big point that was really speculated about in the community when Whole Cake Island was going on was that are Judge's eyebrows the same shape as Sanji's, meaning do they go in the same direction as Sanji's? But I'm thinking, seeing as how this arc is tying more closely into like a subplot of Whole Cake Island, and to an extension, really the entire Yonko arc with Kaido, because that really started with Punk Hazard. We'll get more information about them and presumably Queen later on. So moving on though, the CP0 are wanting to board Egghead, and we see a cool, I don't think that this has ever been shown off before. We've seen this cool sort of podcast mic version of a Den Den Mushi. I don't think we've ever seen a Den Den Mushi in this sort of contraption before. That's cool. I like that a lot. Okay, so we see various CPs on the sea, and my little guy is still there. Love that guy. He's great. But yeah, we cut to basically Kaku complaining about Vegapunk not letting them board the island. Lucy is sort of catching on that Vegapunk is suspicious of their reasoning for boarding the island. Vegapunk is then accused by Lucy for various marine vessels owned by Cypherpole agents coming up missing and not leaving the island. Then Pythagoras, who is speaking, says that's not true. Lilith gets angry at this and says, if you don't believe us, I have a good mind to actually let you board the island and find out. Very funny to me because it really, from what happens later on in this chapter, it really does seem like the female variants of Vegapunk get into the mischief where the men sort of stay out of it. I find that very amusing. But yeah, so they deny them entry to board the island, and then Lucy comes up with the conclusion that they're going to abandon ship and use S-Bear, which is the Seraphim Kuma, to board the island. This is incredibly interesting because later on we find out that the Seraphim Kuma S-Bear, which S-Bear, by the way, that's super on the nose, but as was S Shark, so I'm not surprised. What's super interesting about this, but it makes the most sense in this case, is that Seraphim Kuma has the ability of the Paw Paw fruit. Because, of course he does, because Kuma has spent the most time with Vegapunk out of any warlord. So of course the Seraphim variant of him would have the same powers. But moving on, also he's not wearing gloves. Seraphim Kuma is not wearing gloves. S-Bear, no gloves. Very interesting. Okay, we come back to the Kamabaka Kingdom, and Kuma is running. He gets his hands free. He no longer is wearing gloves anymore. Another interesting bit, I think what I mentioned about the Paw Paw Fruit's abilities being negated when the user grasps something is true, because here you have a scene of him grasping the wires out of his chest, and then he gets a hand free, and it's implied that he slaps himself, but it's not really clear, because there have been depictions of him before and correct me if I'm wrong, but there have been depictions of him, especially like in Thriller Bark and in some video games too, in which he doesn't need to touch himself in order to teleport. He just does. A famous scene of this is where he just sort of teleports in the middle of Kizaru and Rayleigh's fight back in Shabandi before the time skip started. And he was only there for like a brief moment, talked to Rayleigh, and then he was out. But he didn't really paw himself once, if I'm recalling things correctly. So this is interesting. Maybe he's just doing this because he's in a frazzled state and his mind is sort of gone, so he's just doing things on instinct as opposed to doing things based on the skills that he's built up in being a user of this fruit. But we'll see. Also, the interesting thing is that I think I'm right in that he's actually popping himself to Egghead Island in order to protect Vegapunk. But I'm wondering now, is it going to take him 3 days to get there? Or like with many devil fruits, where it's sort of like rules for thee but not for me kind of the effect, because it takes 3 days for him to set an object somewhere, okay, or a person. So when he teleports, even when it's long distance, is it instant transmission, basically, like in Dragon Ball? Because based on him getting to Thriller Bark without a ship and his various sort of popping in and out of places during various points of Thriller Bark, it would suggest that his self-teleportation is faster than when he deflects a person or object. But we shall see. I still think we are due for a sort of Oda box breakdown of what the Paw Paw fruit actually does, because we got like a brief explanation, but not a big formal explanation, like say during the Impel Down arc when we got a big explanation of Crocodile's dehydration powers and exactly how Buggy's Chop Chop fruit powers worked. So we'll see. But when he poofs himself, all the medical equipment falls off of him, and Dragon just calls off for him. So back at the lab, Vegapunk begins to explain his dream, which is the title of the chapter. He says he's been really using the berries that the government has provided for him to develop his research. However, that research ran too deep, and he was going into the energy source that made the giant robot run. We know that energy sources have been a sort of theme throughout this arc because Lilith mentions that Vegapunk was looking to make a sun earlier on in the arc. So Vegapunk has always been after the sort of golden goose egg of free, sustainable energy. And that's his dream, to give unlimited energy to the world. And he understands that energy is flowing everywhere and anywhere. So he's just trying to compact that down and harness it so it can be used in devices and such. And he feels as though finding out what the robot runs on is the key to that. However, the government does not like that, and that's why Lucy is here to claim his head. I wonder how people in the higher echelons of the government found out that he was either close or about to discover the sort of secret to harnessing the world's energy, like from the air. I wonder how that came to be. I think I may know how, but we shall see. Moving on though. Oh, also Jinbei makes a good point that this sort of abolishment of energy being a expendable resource would end a lot of the world's problems. So he's kind of our exposition man in that way. As he says, wars are often waged over energy, so getting rid of energy as an issue would stop those wars. And Vegapunk points out that is correct. That is why he wants to go with Luffy, so the government doesn't kill him. That's why he wants to go out to sea. And then he also mentions that the discovery of what the robot ran on is sort of an inheritance of Clover's will. Though I'm assuming it's Clover. It doesn't say that exactly, but seeing as how Clover was such a intimate part of Vegapunk's introduction, it has to be Clover. And Clover is one who was assassinated on screen for getting deep and finding out things about the Void Century that he was supposed to find out. So Jinbei hears an explosion, and then Vegapunk further explains that he's going to be axed because he knows too much, like the people of Ohara, like Clover. And he says the ruckus is CP0. Luffy, having never heard of CP0, says 0 and mentions, I thought they were called CP9. And then, okay, Jinbei says something weird. And I'm kind of weirded out about Jinbei being the exposition man, because, or how the narrative paints him as the exposition man, because in some instances it makes sense, right? Like, say, at the end of Fisherman Island, when he explains to Luffy that there was a big confrontation between Aki Inu and Akioji, and then Aki Inu became the fleet admiral, or how Teach became a Yonko, right? Those are sort of world newspaper things. Like, if you were on the sea or just in the world and you're not in an isolated location, you would know about those things. However, things get weird with Jinbei for me when he knows about, or even has an inkling about, like, what Sulong is. The only way he would know what Sulong even roughly is if Peckham's told him, right? But he never was established to have any sort of relationship with Peckham's. So how would he know that? You know, how would he even know what Sulong is, or even have, or rumor as to what Sulong is? It's very strange. And now here, he knows about CP0 and their standing in the world government, which I don't know. That seems really, like, how would he know that? It's just kind of weird that he knows this much. Like, I could see maybe Robin knowing, because Robin's kind of been painted as that type of character. But Jinbei, it's weird, because Jinbei seems to be like someone who would know piratey things that would be reported in the newspaper, or things he's heard about from other pirates. But the CP0 seems to be something super secretive, so why would he know? Kaku is nerding out about the city, which I believe is very in character for him, because if I recall, he was kind of free-spirited and very enthusiastic back during Water 7 into Enies Lobby. And then even the people of the laboratory are kind of confused as to why these Cypher Pole agents are wearing white suits instead of black suits. The sea beast they've taken out has made it back to the people of this island. And then we see the sea beasts feasting on the vessel they abandoned. And here it is said S-Bear does indeed have the Paw Paw fruit. It's described here as Paw Paw powers. So in that line of thinking, that makes total sense to me. There is this deployment of S-Shark, S-Snake, and S-Hawk. So Boa and Mihawk Seraphim are called S-Snake and S-Shark. Oh no, S-Snake and S-Hawk, respectively. That makes a lot of sense. Again, we're really on the nose with these names, but it's easy to follow. I do wonder with, I guess, who would be Gecko Moria, right? Would he be S-Gecko or S-Bat? Because he fused bats more than any sort of gecko theming. I mean, he has a gecko attack, and I guess he sort of transforms into a gecko when he uses Shadow Asgard. He looks like a gecko. But, like, yeah, the majority of his set is bat themed. So we'll see about that. And is Doflamingo Seraphim and Crocodile Seraphim simply S Flamingo and S Crocodile? Which S Crocodile, okay, that's a little on the nose. That's on the nose. But I get it, but ooh-wee. S Flamingo is funny. I get that. I still wonder, are there any really complications or, like, implications of cloning a celestial dragon? I mean, is that a crime to clone a celestial dragon? Because that seems like it would be a bigger deal than it's presenting itself to be. But we'll see. We haven't even seen Doflamingo Seraphim, so we'll see. I do wonder now, though, do the rest of the Seraphims who originate from Dofu users, can they use those same Dofu powers? A big one would be Boa. I wonder what S-Hawk's Dofu is if he has one. I think I might know, and I'm going to talk about it in a video, but we'll see. Moving on, though. Sentomaru is given control of the Seraphim, and Atlas is set to be called back to the lab, right? Okay, so Vegapunk instructs Luffy to take Boa to the lab stratum above the clouds, and then he disappears, and everyone freaks out about him disappearing. So I guess this is some sort of warp power like he had when he first arrived and he was stuck in the robot. So yeah, how does he warp? It has to be like a Star Trek beam me up Scotty sort of thing. And then we see Kaku is very amazed by the hologram and tries to Tempest kick it, and Stussy tells him not to bother, and she points out that it's a hologram. Now, this is where things get weird, because then Lucy says, "You're well versed as ever, Stussy," and she says, "Yeah, this takes me back." Okay, now, a few videos ago, I touched on this thing that a guy in my Discord, shout out to you by the way, a guy in my Discord brought up, and I think this is a good theory. He theorized that Stussy is a clone of Vegapunk. She's the lust of Vegapunk. She is Vegapunk's lust. She's the embodiment of his lust, which I kind of see now, because why would she know about all this? She seems too young to have worked for Vegapunk. She could be someone's daughter. That's very possible. Don't know. Could be Vegapunk's daughter. Don't know, because now we know that Vegapunk's large head is due to him having a dull fruit. It's not sort of any like genetic thing. So she could be Vegapunk's daughter. Possibly. Though, is it possible that she is the, I guess, technically 7th clone of Vegapunk? Possibly. I do wonder, though. It's kind of some weird framing around her, because I'll have to double check. But I think she's the one that introduced all the bodies of Vegapunk before we formally met him. So that's kind of interesting how just intimate she seems to be with Vegapunk related subjects and topics. Even understanding that this monster is a hologram. Like, that's a very alien thing that no one but someone who was familiar with Vegapunk would know. There aren't holograms roaming around the One Piece world. This isn't easily accessible technology. You understand? So yeah, her knowing that a hologram is even a hologram is weird. And then furthermore, she goes to explain that the 2 lines that are surrounding Egghead have some sort of barrier field around them, and then when you pass through that barrier field, you get shocked, and it's called the Frontier Dome. And she goes on to say it's a deterrent system that covers the entire lab stratum, so the entire section that Luffy and the gang are going up to. Air entry is protected by this sort of big energy grid. Kaku goes up to see, he gets shocked, and he yells at Stussy for it. But the weird thing about this is that it's kind of self-grandizing, and how she goes on to describe this, because she ends off with saying the moral of the story is it's unwise to underestimate the world's greatest scientists. So if she is Vegapunk herself, she will be patting herself on the back for an achievement that's essentially her achievement. And then Lucy sort of gives her a backhanded chastisement, saying, "You should really mention this kind of intel beforehand." And this is why I'm kind of suspicious, because these sort of jokes usually lead to plot points. Because why would she be so flippant in giving out this information? It's very odd. I think I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I think she might be a Vegapunk. I think that's a very high possibility. Atlas comes running in, and then we get another shot of Stussy, and she says, "Atlas, she's one of the Vegapunks." I don't know, it's just interesting, because all 3 of them were briefed on what the Vegapunks were, right? But then we know that none of the members who were on that ship has actually seen a picture of any of the Vegapunks. But she knows what Atlas looks like precisely. It's interesting. That's just interesting to me. She just knows what she looks like. Why would she know what she looks like? You know? Weird. Okay. And then Atlas comes in to attack. She winds up her fist for an ultra mighty punch. Lucy is not having any of this, and 6 King guns her. Ragogun. Just out the gate. This is so interesting to me. And then Kaku comments that Lucy has no mercy. But this is very interesting, because he felt the need to use what was essentially his most powerful attack on this random person. Though I can see why he did it, because the mission is to kill all 7 bodies of Vegapunk. So I get why, but it's just interesting that he's using this much degree of force on someone. And the weird part about it is this doesn't even kill Atlas, which means Atlas really is tough. But what does this mean for Rob Belushi? Because this could mean one of two things. His sort of casualty in bringing out something so powerful could mean that he's got more stuff in the bag, and now this is just his sort of soft yet effective weapon in dealing with somewhat or potentially troublesome targets. Kind of like how at the start of the time skip, Luffy used gear third attacks freely just to take care of large beasts. Could be a thing like that. Or it could be positioning Luffy to be kind of bad. I hope it's not the latter. Because if he's kind of bad, next to him being an antagonist, because I mean Luffy's got 2 force powers now. What is a angry cat gonna do against that? But we'll see. Moving on. Yes, Atlas is knocked out, but she's still breathing. And Luffy recognizes Lucy as the pitching guy, and Lucy recognizes Luffy as Straw Hat. So, no break next week. Fantastic. Love to see it. But that is something that's kind of bothering me now. Because what does that actually mean? You know? Like, is Lucy actually that weak? Or was this just a taste of what he can do now? Which is why he was so free to use this technique on a target, even though he didn't know the exact threat of the target. Maybe he was just doing it to, again, kill the target effectively. In any case, we'll see how this develops. It's very interesting. And that's all I have for you today. See you next time. If you like stuff like this, please feel free to check out my YouTube channel, Polipede Works. And if you like what you see, I would appreciate your subscription. Thank you so much. See you next time.